Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on our Coffee with C3. Today's topic is underwriting realities. My name is Celeste Moya, and I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Lisa Brown and Suzanne Mutua. So just as a
Morning.
reminder on these calls, we are going to ask you if you have a question, please enter it into the chat or into the Q&A, and we will try to address it at the end of the call if there's time. But if we don't have time, we will reach out to you. Whoever has a question, we will reach out to you and answer your question. So with that, because of time, we're going to jump right into our underwriting realities. So the first topic, or the first kind of component that we wanted to talk about in the underwriting realm, is generally in the world of a consumer, best price is usually the most competitive option. However, that's not always the case when it comes to life insurance products. Product and pricing isn't all of it. So I'm going to show you an example of a client who had a medical history, had some significant things that happened in the past, but also had a lot of favorable components to their overall profile that allowed them to be looked at a little bit more favorably. When we receive a client, Lisa and Suzanne, who are the people that lead our underwriting and our case management area, they take a client's information, send it out to the insurance companies, what we call informally, so that they can review it and start to provide an offer. And an offer just means a risk classification, a medical classification, which can range from, you can see here, preferred plus, which would be your best, all the way to a decline. So this one client was underwritten completely different among these various insurance companies here, everywhere from a decline to a company that offered him preferred plus. If we would have just run all of these products initially, all of these companies initially, and just ran them all at preferred plus, this last company here may have not been the most competitive from a pricing perspective. But because they were able to offer the client more favorable underwriting, then now they become more competitive. So in the world of insurance, best price doesn't always equal most competitive, which is why underwriting and leading with that many times is such an important component of what we do. Now, we have mentioned in the past something named underwriting advocacy, but what does that really entail? Well, just like any advocate, we work on behalf of the client. So we are representing the client, not the insurance companies. And by doing so, we are able to take advantage of relationships that we have and understand how to really navigate the insurance company world to best provide the insured with a favorable underwriting advantage. And there's a lot of it that goes into it. I'm going to share one example, then my colleagues are going to share a little bit more information about this as well. But I was working with a client. He is diabetic and had been a smoker. He had quit smoking just a little bit over a year when we applied for some permanent life insurance coverage. So the insurance company receives his medical records, sees that he just quit smoking about 13 months ago, is diabetic, his labs were just okay, they weren't quite perfect. And so they came back and gave him a table rating, a pretty significant table rating. So that would be below standard. However, what they hadn't factored in is that the client had lost some weight, but also gained some muscle because he was doing physical activity that led to that. So he had improved his health. He had also changed his eating habits. He was enrolled in a program that his doctor has to help diabetics improve their overall lifestyle. So what we went back and did was put that together, gather that other ancillary information that really paints the picture as far as the client's medical profile. And with that information, because the insurance company, the underwriters were just seeing medicals, were just seeing labs, they didn't see everything else the client was doing to improve their living. With that, they were able to improve his underwriting significantly. So that's what we mean by underwriting advocacy. Lisa, what are some of the other things that you see underwriting advocacy entails?
Yeah, one of the most common issues we've run across is the accuracy within the medical records. You know, sometimes you were a previous smoker, but it's still listed as smoker in your medical records. The underwriter gets your file and they automatically want to charge smoker rates, but when in fact you've been a non-smoker for several years. Medications, another item we find quite often that, you may have discontinued some medication, but it's still listed in your records. Your family history. This is a really big one. Sometimes family medical records are commingled. So for instance, we had a father-son. The father's medical records were commingled with the son's, and it looked like he'd been to a cardiologist when he hadn't. And then the most important one is the alcohol use. When you go back to the doctor, you've got a stack of papers you have to fill out. And by the time you get to the end of the questionnaires, you're tired of reading the questions and you just start checking boxes. We recently had a case that the alcohol use. The client had indicated he drinks more than 6 drinks in the setting every week. And to an underwriter, that's considered a binge drinker. But what he meant is he only had 6 drinks a week, not 6 drinks every time he had drinks. So it's really important to look at the medical records and make sure they match the actual clients, what the clients participates in and doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had a similar situation with a client that his medical records noted HIV, but it was just when the medical records were turned into digital, that information was transferred over from a wrong client. And so had we not really looked into it, the insurance company just sees, here's a client that has HIV. So definitely, I agree. Medical records are really important in the underwriting advocacy component. So Suzanne, you were going to share a little bit about what we're seeing from a doctor and an underwriter's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, generally, 2 different ways of looking at information. Your doctor may classify what may be a serious condition as a good condition, while the underwriter is looking at it more adversely. And, that oftentimes we find that the clients don't understand. A great example is, we have a very young client in her late 20s with rheumatoid arthritis, very manageable disease, but she was taking Humira, a drug that has some serious side effects. And because of the drug, while the condition may not have been as serious and is managed well, the drug presented a new set of risks to the underwriter. And they, in turn, were a lot more conservative in their offer. And of course, the client is shocked, not knowing, why am I getting technically a bad offer or a more costly offer, but it was because of the drug. And that's the big difference between a doctor monitoring the client and an underwriter looking at the same set of conditions. Yes. And
go
go ahead, Celeste.
Well, another component that we see also is the impact of family history, right? So a doctor may not always address family history as seriously as an underwriter will. So I'll give you my example. Both of my parents have had cancer before the age of 65. Now, their cancers are not some that are generally genetic or something that I may have. However, that the insurance companies see that as a potential risk. Therefore, even if I work out all the time, I eat healthy, I will never be able to qualify, or up until now, maybe things will change in the future, for preferred plus. I can be preferred, but I can never be in that top category because of my parents' history. And so that's how family history has impacted me. Lisa, you've seen it from a different perspective.
Yeah, so it can impact your insurability. What we've also seen is for instance, if the cancer is gender specific and you're a female and your father had prostate cancer, that's not going to affect your insurability. But if your mom had breast cancer and you did some genetic testing and it's shown that you're not at risk for getting the disease, then it wouldn't affect your insurability. At the same time, for instance, if a proposed insured's dad had prostate cancer at the age of 65, and the client that's now applying for insurance is age 70 with the normal PSA readings, that his family history is not going to affect his insurability. So it doesn't always affect your insurability, but most of the time it does.
Absolutely. Suzanne, you were going to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing from this perspective, clinical medicine versus insurance medicine.
Yes, this is always another interesting category that clients have a ton of questions about. What we find is that oftentimes when a client is followed by a doctor, the doctor has the benefit of following the clients and the disease progression for a long period of time. The insurance company gets a snapshot of the client's health with the benefit of the history, because the medical records oftentimes include a history, but they get a snapshot of seeing what the client looks like today. they don't have the benefit of the data following the client as the disease progresses. And they have to hedge their bets, and they have to make a decision based on what they see today. And they have to make sure from an actuarial perspective, they're not making the wrong decision and not costing the insurance company money. Now, in addition to just looking at clinical medicine versus underwriting medicine, they have lots to consider. I mentioned the actuarial factors. There are costs associated with how they price these items, and they have to take that into consideration and make sure that they are making an underwriting offer that is in line with what the actuarial factors tell them. We see their own mortality experience come into play as well. One insurance company may have had, a big number of diabetics dying and going into claim. That company is not going to look favorably at diabetics, while another company may have lower mortality rates with regards to diabetes, or they have had more successes with taking action of a certain kind, and they may look at diabetics favorably. So you have to look at a whole picture, and that's why underwriting advocacy comes to play. In addition to that, there is technology advances, healthcare advances, and these underwriters are going through continuous education to make sure that they are keeping up with what is going on with technology updates, what is going on with healthcare advances, to make sure that they are given a good decision. They obviously want to make sure that they're profitable, and they want to make sure that they are keeping up with the market. So all of those factors come into play when it comes to underwriting. And what we're seeing is that more and more conditions are becoming insurable. Celeste has some examples and something to say about that.
Yeah, so it's important not to self-eliminate, because sometimes a client will think I have X condition, and that just means that I don't qualify for insurance. And that's not necessarily the case. As Suzanne mentioned, there's so many advances in technology and healthcare, and the companies are informed of this as well. And so they use that when they are updating their underwriting standard requirements, qualifications. So Lisa, you were going to share a little bit about some of these, what maybe was uninsurable before is insurable now, some of these conditions.
Sure. Yeah. So cancer, almost always it was a decline, but based on the type of cancer you had, when you had your treatment, and when the treatment was completed, it's a possibility that you can still get insurance. One thing that has always been uninsurable is HIV, but with medical advances, HIV is just now viewed as another chronic illness by life insurance companies, along with hepatitis C. So you can still get insurance and have hepatitis or HIV as long as it's managed properly. It's just important to understand your illness and take the proper steps to control it, whether it's diabetes, depression, cancer, HIV, whatever it is making sure that you follow through with all the treatment and continue on your medication to control it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Preventative care is important.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very important.
Yes.
And last but not least, it's really important also to take action. So Suzanne, I think you had an example of sometimes a potential consequence of not taking action.
Yes, a great case study that we had and we experienced was we had gone through the informal underwriting process. The client's medical records had been reviewed. This was a client in their mid to late 50s, and everything was great. Great health, daily jogger, took great care of himself, ate well, great weight, no issues at all. And one day during a jog, he had a medical event and he suffered a mini stroke in the middle of a jog. And just like that, his underwriting odds changed. Obviously his life was impacted, and thankfully he recovered well. But now this becomes part of his medical history. And any underwriter looking at him from that point forward has to take that into account. And fortunately, he was still insurable after a certain waiting period, but he went from being preferred plus, which is best class, to a table D, which is technically considered substandard and about 4 tables below what you would consider to be average health. The impact to his underwriting obviously is an impact to his costs of insurance. And we had to restructure, and ended up with a joint policy instead of an individual policy on him. So that was an example of not striking while the iron is hot. So it is important to take action when you have underwriting offers, because we just don't know what tomorrow holds.
Right. And unfortunately, we see this way too often, right? We see this way too often happen with clients where action is not taken, and now everything changes as far as what they have access to. Well, because of time, if you do have a question, please still enter it into the chat or the Q&A, or feel free to reach out to us directly. Because of time, we're going to have to end the call. I want to be respectful of your 15 minutes. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I do want to share that our next call will be our Consume and Converse series, and we'll be featuring Michael Kiobasa with Kiobasa Provision Company. And that's going to be taking place February 1st at noon. So thank you all again so much for joining us this morning. And we want to wish you and your family members, your loved ones, a safe and happy holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.